Thanks, Adam, and thank you for all who participated in the live auction. I'm honored to introduce this year's keynote speaker. A past client of the Crisis Center, Stefan has an interesting story of surviving intimate partner violence at the hands of his wife. He came to the Crisis Center with a history of abuse and trauma. His story is important as we work to understand how domestic violence affects men, their access to supportive resources, and the stereotypes that get in the way of safety. Stefan works at AECOM, doing engineering and construction work. He has 2 sons, 7 and 2, that he loves to prospect with, and is excited as his oldest will have an exhibit at a mining museum. Stefan has been a lifelong teacher and started tutoring at the age of 11. Throughout his life, he has been a volunteer coaching sports and math competition events. Settling in Colorado in 2012, Stefan loves to work on watches and cars. His greatest joy is spending time with his 2 boys. Stefan, thank you for sharing your powerful story and time with us tonight.
My name is Stefan Chuk. I grew up in Pennsylvania with a family that supported me. I had great parents, a younger brother, and a father that all were loving. And I never experienced any sort of domestic violence issues in the house. However, I got a little bit of exposure as a teenager. My aunt works as a chief accountant at a local women's shelter there, and she begged me to help her with some bookkeeping work until she could find a suitable intern. During that experience, I sat in an open cubicle and basically the lobby where battered women would come through. And it was horribly uncomfortable. And the only thing I could think was how much it depressed me that another human could cause that person in front of me to be reacting the way that they are, to put somebody in that state. It was just unconscionable to me. After that experience, I completed high school, I went on to college, I got a great job, started traveling for work, and eventually met my future wife in Canada. Everything was going great. We were deciding where to go, whether I would stay and work in Canada or whether she would relocate back to America. She decided she wanted to come to America. So we went through the immigration process and settled in Colorado. After getting married, everything went about as well as we could have hoped for. We got pregnant very quickly. We bought our first house. We had work. We had everything we ever wanted or needed. Late in that pregnancy, with our first son, everything started to change. And I first thought that these new attitudes, these new actions that I was witnessing were just part of a normal pregnancy and that things would pass. But they didn't. After our first son was born, my wife quickly became overwhelmed and she took it out on me mostly. Within a few months, she had hit me for the first time. And when she did so, I reacted instinctually. I remembered always thinking to myself, when I saw these battered women repeatedly, it just stunned me that it wouldn't be their instinct to report it. So that's what I set out to do. I went for a drive, I parked, and I called the police. But in that moment, after the actions of my instinct faded, it suddenly became real. And it dawned on me that if I were to pursue this, that our son and any future children may not be able to see their mother again because of her immigration status. So I returned back home. During that event, my wife's parents were there and they witnessed this, and we all spoke to each other about it. They were very supportive, and I was hoping things would get better that would be sort of a rock bottom. But that's not what ended up happening. A couple of months later, it happened again and again, and it kept happening for about 5 years. And during that period of time, I knew that this wasn't right. I knew that I didn't deserve this, and I knew that my wife needed help. But I couldn't bring myself to do much else about it other than speak to her and to speak to her parents. I was terrified about anything going further, about talking to police if I wanted to go that route. It's awfully embarrassing to even think about my wife repeatedly physically hurting me when I'm a big, strong guy. It's hard to come to grips with it. But there was an event that started to change my thinking. We ended up being blessed with another son through IVF in 2018. And before that time, I was doing everything I could while we just had one son to ease the burdens of parenthood on my wife, to do everything I could to try to support her daily tasks and her new responsibilities. It got to the point, started with me going to work early at 4 a.m. so I could return home and be with the new family. It ended up, through the next 4 or 5 years, getting to a point to where I was expected only to work when our son was in school. And he went to school half days. That was only 2 or 3 hours. And I wasn't allowed to go back to work until everybody else was sleeping. So I'd stay up until 3 a.m., 3:30 a.m. And from there, it was also expected that I would wake up at 5 and do 2 hours of homework with our son before he went to school. It was difficult, but I did it to try to do everything I could to help improve the situation. It was just that nothing that I did was ever enough. And after our second son was born, that became unsustainable. It was impossible. They didn't sleep at the same times every day. Only one went to school. And my wife stayed home with our youngest son while I dropped our oldest off at school and went to work for a couple of hours. That proved to be too much in the situation. And within 2 months of our second son being born, my wife hit me repeatedly and actually bruised my ribs during the attack. This was an attack unlike others in the past. And I knew right then and there that I would have to get help, that this wasn't sustainable, worried about the children when they get older at that point. And it was more than just being physically hurt. During that attack, my wife hurt her thumb, and by hitting me. But after she had finished beating me, she told me not to do anything to tear the family apart, and that if I called the police, then I hit her, and she held out her thumb. Because of that, I ended up recording our next conversation where she again threatened to make false allegations if I tried to get any kind of help. And I started reaching out to who I thought I could. I wouldn't reach out to my family or friends because I knew that they'd call the police, and that's not what I wanted to happen. I reached out to a work colleague and to our EAP. And through that, they unsuccessfully tried to get me to report to police. I wasn't ready for that step, but they convinced me to document everything and to try to advocate for counseling for myself and my wife. So that's what I did. And I did so heavily with the help of her family. I reached out to her parents and they promised to help, but they never did help. They were more interested in protecting their daughter from any potential consequences than thinking about their grandchildren. And that was difficult because of the faith I placed in all of them. Over the months, nothing improved. And I was now mentally in this state where I just didn't know what to do anymore. I got to the point to where I blamed myself. At one point, my wife decided that she wanted to have a third child. And I told her that I think we need to work on ourselves first. But she insisted. She told me that she would knock my teeth out before she asked her parents to pay for IVF again. So for 3 nights, I did what she wanted. On the 4th night, I fell asleep before she came upstairs. I woke up to a pain in my hip and her telling me that if she told me in these words, if I get pregnant this month, I will kill your baby. And immediately I blamed myself for any of that happening. Logically, I knew that that beating would eventually come and that I should have taken it right away, that I put myself through it, and I heard the most painful thing that I've ever heard in my life because of my decision. Shortly thereafter, I realized that working with her parents and trying to get us into counseling wasn't going to be enough and that I needed some kind of other help. And this was difficult to do. After the attack where my wife bruised my ribs, she became very paranoid about repercussions. She began to scroll through my cell phone pretty regularly, search my car, examine all the bank and my credit card statements, and video call me 15 times a day when I went to the office to make sure that I was at the office and not elsewhere. So after calling the hotline again, they connected me with the crisis center here locally. And through there, I was able to get help for the first time. This was difficult in a lot of ways to begin this, and I felt embarrassment to even reach out for help, but that should have never been a concern with the people at the crisis center. While I experienced discrimination for the first time in my life as a white man throughout this process, that certainly wasn't true through the counselors, the advocates, the legal advocates, and all the support staff that I've encountered here have been nothing but supportive and helped guide me through this process, this new stage of my life. Even going through this legal process, my wife made good on an earlier threat to make that as expensive as possible while reminding me that I came from a poor family. I was able to help, the Crisis Center was able to help me through that process, through their legal advocacy program. And when I eventually left the house, the shelter received me and had room for my boys as well. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring them with me. But everything I needed, I found it here. This was a difficult process, even though I had my wife on tape threatening to make false allegations. Because of her family's resources, she was able to pursue that. She ended up even filing for a protective order. That was emphatically denied as we listened to that recording, and she was scolded by the judge. I thought that would be that. It hasn't been at all. Because of her resources, she was able to pursue it even harder, make new allegations, even allege that I've been molesting our children. It's been tough to go through some of this. It's even been tough for me sometimes to understand if I'm making the right choices or if I'm reacting to things the right way. That period of my life was just so distorted. I felt like the ground wasn't solid underneath me. The people here gave me guidance. When I doubted myself, they gave me strength. And my biggest hope is that one day I can be in a position to join the mission here at the Crisis Center, because I've seen firsthand how they can help a family, how they can help a community. And I really thank everybody here.